I'm attempting to do an overview of a fairly large subject matter, so this is going to go a little bit quickly. Please feel free to copy things down off the slides, because it will probably take me months to remember to put them online, because I'm terrible at that. Hopefully the video will turn up sooner than I do. Standard setup on a new machine. First thing I do after logging in to a new customer box or a new development server or whatever is, okay, now, I know lots of people hate the curl pipe shirt idiom. I completely understand why, because it requires trusting a random set of stuff. However, CPAN.min.us is an HTTPS-based redirect to GitHub maintained by Marcus Ramberg that then sends you whatever Miyagawa told GitHub to send you. If you don't trust Marcus and Miyagawa, you probably already have a problem in your dependency chain. Curl minus L CPAN minus, tell it to use a local lib in $home, install app CPAN minus and local lib, put the local lib bootstrap into bash RC, log out, log back in again. Do not log out and log back in again if you've just changed your SSHD config. Sorry, a friend of mine tested some changes and discovered that it was slightly more secure than he'd intended. That will give you a basic local lib setup, the easiest way. Obviously, this is not what you're going to be using for production deployments. And also, people are already thinking, what, system Perl? Well, yeah, but basically, ~/perl5 is where I stuff things that I'm just going to need in general. So app-ack almost always goes in there. Various other little bits and pieces. Sometimes handy to have a copy of module call list in there and whatever. And basically, that is, here is the stuff that I need outside of a particular project. And also, if I've just started a project and I'm not really caring about it, I'll happily install things to there until I actually get to the point of doing something more intelligent. People often ask at this point, why not perlbrew? And yeah, basically. Perlbrew is extremely elegant, extremely pleasant to use, and has lots of moving parts that I do periodically snap. So the one thing to be aware of, if you're going to use perlbrew, take the local lib part out of bash RC, because it will get confused. Or alternatively, you can always use local lib deactivate all, which basically loads local lib, and then it looks for everything it's set up itself and deletes them out of your environment variables. So that's a good way to get back to baseline if you're trying to test something from scratch. To use local lib with perlbrew, you use perlbrew lib, which integrates it into the perlbrew clever in a way that basically works. So anyway, how do you get your Perl? Various possibilities. System Perl? Well, honestly, if it's new enough, I'm perfectly happy doing that. A lot of the time, certainly for CPAN development, the system Perl is way newer than what I'm targeting anyway. And for customer stuff, if it's new enough, there are usually bigger problems than which Perl we're using. I just avoid system modules, because system modules are packaged at the versions that make sense for system packaged applications. I don't like to be in a situation where upgrading something to get a newer version of something in user bin ends up changing modules under a deployed application. I like to have control over what a deployed application is running against. And especially on Ubuntu, because Ubuntu being Ubuntu, what they basically do is take a snapshot of whatever Perl modules are in Debian testing and then don't update them until the next release in 6 months, which works about as well as you might expect. FreeBSD, shout out. If you're on FreeBSD, you can use a system Perl because you can build a 526 system Perl. They spent a couple of years getting all of the Perl dependencies out of the core system, basically rewrote them in C or shell, which means that FreeBSD no longer needs a user bin Perl, which means you can have a user local bin Perl from ports that is as recent as you like. And ports being awesome, you can also have several of them. But that's the fun you get from an adult operating system and no system D. Debian's Perl is usually not terrible. Red Hat's Perls usually are. They tend to apply all sorts of random patches that handle something that their commercial support customers need. This is totally fine. You just have to remember that you're not going to get the same treatment unless you have a support contract and are paying at least as much as the person who needed the patch applied that screwed you up. Shout out to the new Fedora Perl maintainer who has gone and done all of the legwork, so the next Fedora release will have a real Perl package again and you won't need to install Perl-core. Freenode hash Perl kind of joined the Fedora Perl channel en masse and mobbed him, and then helped him work around all of the problems he could see, and then he went, yeah, you know what? This really isn't that hard. I'll only need to update the dependencies on a couple of hundred packages. Give me a day. So yeah, very cool. Now, if you're a CPAN author, or otherwise needing to test against lots of the same software against lots of different Perls, perlbrew is totally your friend. But if you only need one Perl, I regard it as kind of overkill. Perl::build provides a script called perl-build, and that's what I usually use for building a single Perl at this point. Just remember, if you have a noexec/temp, it will completely fail because it tries to do the build in a temp dir. So I usually end up doing temp dir equals home temp, and then it works fine. So perl-build is actually perlbrew source code extracted for use in PLenv, which is another environment manager. Specifically, its shell wrappers doesn't intertwingle itself into your shell like perlbrew. And is very much designed for deployment, whereas perlbrew works very hard to be the nicest thing possible for interactive use. I have seen people deploy things using perlbrew. I have seen it work. I have seen all of the problems they were having go away when I ripped perlbrew out and just put the relevant perlbrew built Perl into their shebang line directly. Note that using perlbrew to build a Perl and then bypassing perlbrew and just pointing your script at that Perl in production is completely legitimate. I don't, but again, that's because I'm usually not using perlbrew for that sort of thing because I have a target Perl. But yeah, PLenv is all simple shell wrappers, which tends to be a bit more reliable. Also, it works the same way as all of the other like starenv tools, which means that there's tools like, I think there's one called AnyEnv, I don't remember exactly what it's called, that can manage like PLenv and RBenv and PyEnv and NodeEnv all at the same time, which could be very cool if you have a sufficiently polyglot project. Although, honestly, if you're having to use Ruby, I'm very sorry. I can only get about 20 minutes into using Ruby until I get really annoyed with the OO. You know, where's my has? Where's my roles? Anyway, but the killer feature of PLenv is that if you've got a bunch of modules installed against a PLenv Perl, you can tell it to migrate and it will rebuild the lot of them against the other Perl you specify. This can be really handy. Other than that, it's a good option among many. So I'd say, how do you choose? If you're looking at interactive multi-Perl, perlbrew was designed for that. Nothing else was designed for that. Perlbrew is amazing at it. Deployable multi-Perl, I'd stick with PLenv. And if you want a single custom Perl install, then either perl-build it or, honestly, do the configure and then make dance yourself. It's not actually that difficult, and if you want to be absolutely certain what you're deploying, it really doesn't take very long to make a 4-line shell script that automates exactly the Perl configuration you want. And honestly, again, if the system Perl is good enough for what you're currently doing, use that for the moment and then go and be more clever later. You know, if you're trying to improve an existing deployment setup, it's always a question of which is the thing that changing it will give me the most advantage now. And obviously, if you've got all of your module installation nicely automated, rerunning that automation against a new Perl, if you do decide to build one, shouldn't be hard. And if it is, you should go back and fix the automation first. Yeah, okay, so I said originally that in the abstract I'd mentioned various other bits. I will note that CPAN.pm's distro pref system, where you can basically have a set of patches to be applied to different modules as they install, is really clever and is really nice if you're needing to do things like that. But the problem I've found is, because it wants a distro prefs directory within your CPAN config, you now have to jump through a bunch of hoops to be able to share that CPAN config between multiple machines and multiple developers. So personally, I am more likely to use one of the dark pan solutions I'll mention later and just have a patched version of the Dist where its default installation does whatever the distro pref would have done. Swings and roundabouts. As for apt-get, CPAN Plus's CPAN to Dist will generally recursively build Dist for whatever your operating system is. But if you don't have a requirement to do all of your deployments as one package per Dist, there's usually an easier way, and I much prefer having the dependencies alongside the app. Because I have absolutely run into situations in production where I had two applications and basically they both needed a different version of a specific module, because one of them needed a newer one for a specific feature and another one needed an older one to avoid a specific bug. And I don't want to have to deal with that, right? I like to be able to deploy an application and not break anything else on the same production platform. Of course, if you're going full like cloud, and therefore there is one application per an entire operating system installed, none of this applies. But anyway, so people keep asking about how do you Docker? I'm kind of like, well, Docker images are basically built up by taking a base image and then running a sequence of commands on them. The same sequence of commands I'm going to suggest in general should work absolutely the same with Docker. So if you're looking at Docker as an option, cool, but on the other hand, I've generally found it's nicer, even if you are using Docker, to be able to do your basic dev cycle just on a straight development box and then build a Docker image when you're done, because otherwise you have to rebuild and launch the image every time. There is nothing I find quite so frustrating as suggesting a minor fix to somebody and them, on IRC and them going, yeah, that's cool. I'll be able to test it in 10 minutes when the Docker image is rebuilt. No, should be able to test it in a minute flat or under. If you can't do that, you've done something wrong. Anyway, but yeah, Docker as a deployment solution, fine. All of this advice should apply to Docker. If any of it appears not to, please feel free to bug me later. Anyway, so some of you may be wondering what happened to deployment stuff that I've been mentioning over the past few years, which was basically a Prolog-inspired solver system that could handle conflicts and so on. The answer is, I was intending to release it at YepCNA 2 years ago and broke it completely. So I'm slowly rewriting it to not be of I don't even want to know. But basically, until I get this thing completely solid, there is absolutely no point shipping what I already have, because it'll just make a nightmare when people want to upgrade to a newer one. It's not currently enough better than the current solutions that are already battle-tested to inflict it on you. So I guess you could see this talk as a prologue to my prologue. Though, given how long it's taking me, I am seriously wondering about the launch version number. Anyway, so you have a Perl, great. You have CPAN minus, right? Okay, if you're in perlbrew or PLM, you need to use their command to install CPAN-M, because otherwise you'll end up with a CPAN-M installed against the wrong Perl, and alarms, excursions, and pain will result. But basically, the feature is there, use the feature, work with the tool, not against the tool. If you want to go against the tool, throw the tool away, do it with perl-build, and do it the old-fashioned way. Okay, so adding a module. Now, a lot of the time for CPAN stuff, I still use a makefile.pl, but that's mostly because I'm completely used to the ugly. For anything new, I just use a CPAN file. So CPAN file has a nice simple syntax, and then you can do an install dot with CPAN M. Always do it that way. Never just CPAN M a module, because you will forget to add it to the CPAN file afterwards, and then your deployment won't work. Or at least, I never remember, so I always do it this way. And it's basically the moral equivalent of install save for NPM. If any of you have had JavaScript inflicted upon you recently. I will note there is a thing called CPM that is built on the new Menlo CPAN minus backend, which tries to be NPM style and is interesting in that it will do parallel installation. But I like the CPAN M ecosystem. There's a lot of stuff that builds around it. So unless you have a very specific reason to use CPM, I wouldn't bother, but do take a look at it first, because, as always, everybody's environment is slightly different. Don't write it off because I've not found it that useful. Check it out and consider it anyway. So once you've got that, make sure you put the CPAN file in Git. Otherwise, bunnies are going to cry. Honestly, that's quite enough for early dev. Just let it go into the global local lib or whatever. When you just started, trying to set up a complete environment probably isn't worth it, because you haven't even thought about which server it's going to end up on. And if you do want isolated dependencies to make sure you've got everything right, then CPAN M minus capital L rather than lowercase l will kick all non-core directories out of your inc and then install a complete local lib from that. At which point, given a local lib is just a Perl 5 install directory, Perl minus I is quite sufficient to bring it into scope for running stuff. And a lot of the time, you can just use findbin to say, the local lib's going to be relative to the script, so let's just use libit automatically, and then you don't have to think about that. So, having done this, I'm guessing this reminds a few of you of something. And that would be carton install, because carton basically takes your CPAN file, builds out the local/local lib for you, and then writes a CPAN file.snapshot with all of the versions installed. The one disadvantage is carton doesn't run modules tests, and the -- no test option is hard-coded in carton. So you are always working with CPAN M minus N, where the N stands for no idea if it's actually going to work. So what I tend to do is do a full rebuild with CPAN M minus capital L occasionally, just to get all of the test suites run, just for a little bit of extra security. It's cheaper and easier than remembering to carry a blankie. Anyway, so if you're doing a single app deployment, you are actually basically done at this point. Carton plus some way of finding that local lib. You make sure to put the snapshot into Git as well, because then you can do carton install -- deployment, which will use the versions out of the CPAN file.snapshot. One thing to bear in mind is it installs things in a fairly random order. So it's worth noting that if you're using things like JSON maybe XS that have optional depths that get pulled in under various circumstances, you want to specify, for example, which underlying JSON library you want in your CPAN file, because that's going to make sure that things get installed in the right order and JSON maybe XS actually finds the right JSON library. Otherwise, again, life can get annoyingly complicated. This sort of thing is slightly annoying, but given the amount of time you've already saved by using this stuff, generally, I'm much less annoyed by that than anything else. And also, always remember, because carton installs to local, and then once it's done, it scutters local for .meta files, which are basically the meta.json, but CPAN minus installs them, which means you can manually install things into local / to get exact versions of things or whatever, and then run carton, and your CPAN file.snapshot will contain the manually installed versions as well, which gives you a nice way of basically crowbarring things when you need to get something fixed quickly and still having a carton workflow. So yeah, there is also carton exec. Carton exec is basically a wrapper that does the minus capital I, except with a little bit more clever. It's kind of useful for testing because it does the kit core directories out. But basically, I only ever use it in development because in deployment, I should already be sure of that, and I just want the minus capital I because it's simpler. Because the fewer moving parts in your deployment, the fewer things you have to debug when you get woken up at 3 a.m., right? You can tell I started off in operations, right? But that is a matter of taste. I've seen lots of people use carton exec in production and it work out fine for them. I just don't want to have to ask myself the question, is carton the thing causing the problem here when I have a problem? Similar to my bypassing perlbrew. Miyaga has also written a thing called Carmel, which is basically heading towards being a new and improved carton. It has a bunch of extra clever in it, which is really quite interesting, but also a bit clever for my taste. This is another, I tend to avoid this because I don't want that level of clever, but have a look, because that clever might be enough useful to you that you want to try it anyway. So yeah, I can't do one size fits all. This is why you get a big broad overview with a bunch of options. Oh, and I mentioned apt-get earlier. There is a thing called FPM, which I think officially stands for effing package me. And basically, you can give FPM one of all sorts of things, and it will spit out a vendor package of the style of your choice. You can do it from a tarball, so if I'm told I have to deliver something as a deb, what I'll generally do is build the app with a carton local, tar up the entire application, including its local lib, and then use FPM to convert that through to a vendor package. Systems can work with a vendor package, but I still don't have to worry about system modules screwing me up later. And again, I find this makes my life simpler. If you have a bunch of applications that are all using the same versions of modules, you may find doing one package per module nice, and it's worth considering looking at FPM for that as well, although I suspect CPAN to Dist is still prettier. Anyway, I mean, honestly, a lot of the time, as long as you can fully automate it, just shipping a tarball and having Ansible or Puppet or whatever unpack the new version of the tarball to upgrade works just as well as anything else. At this point, okay, that basically covers it for a single application with only CPAN dependencies. Now, what if you want this thing to become a dependency of something else that you're writing? Bear in mind that a CPAN dist is just the standard Perl distribution format. You can totally use these for things that aren't going to go onto CPAN because all of the tools know how to work with them anyway. So in terms of making a dist, I could do an entire talk on dist builders. It would be almost as interesting as this one. Distilla is the maximum overkill, configure it to work exactly the way you want it to solution, which means that you generally end up with a 50-line ini file and have to basically walk people through exactly what your config does. Basically, Distilla is a distribution builder construction kit from which you build the exact distribution builder you wanted. I am extremely glad that it successfully killed module install, which was an even crazier attempt at the same thing. But I personally often find it, again, overkill. There may be a running theme here. Dist Milla is basically a default set of Distilla configs. There's also a Distilla plugin bundle called, I think, Starter, that's fairly nice for starting with. And there's also Manila, which is basically maximum underkill, and works fairly nicely. Plus, if you want to go seriously cranky minimalist, there is actually CPAN file support for Xutils MakeMaker. So you can write a plain old school makefile.pl and still have your CPAN file used, which is why I'm saying you don't need to worry about the MakeMaker ugly. Okay, so let's assume we now have a dist or three, and we want to deploy an application that depends on those as well as a bunch of CPAN stuff. So it's time to venture into the dark pan. Always makes me want to go dun 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 dun. The classic way of doing this was you used CPAN Mini to pull down a copy of the tip of CPAN, and then use CPAN Mini Inject to inject all of your own modules. This is fine if you're okay with the latest versions from CPAN. CPAN Mini Inject is not that smart. In fact, honestly, it is incredibly thick. But that means that if Mini CPAN breaks, it's usually very, very obvious how it broke and why and how to fix it. So it's often quite a nice solution. And then once you've got a local mirror of some sort, you can point CPAN M at it with the dash mirror option, and Carton takes it as an environment variable. You may wish to write this environment variable down, because I'm damned if I can find it in the documentation. Alternatively, you can do what I do every time and read the source again. And that all works fine. If you want multiple local CPANs, then I would suggest having a look at Pinto. Pinto is the maximum overkill solution in this space. So you can have multiple custom CPANs, various disks in them, do all sorts of maintenance stuff in it. I mean, you can tell it's maximum overkill by the fact it has like 27 subcommands and depends on at least like 6 MooseX modules. But again, if you're looking for maximum overkill, this is where to look. It's a very good implementation of maximum overkill. Honestly, you could do an entire talk on Pinto features. If you just want one local fully pinned CPAN, you want to be looking at ORPAN 2. ORPAN 2 basically allows you to explicitly add all of the CPAN disks you want at the specific versions you want. This is boring and slow. Reverse engineer it from your CPAN file.snapshot, seriously. If you're wondering how to reverse engineer it from your CPAN file.snapshot, the answer is, well, you know, if only you had a language that was really good at extracting little bits of text from files. So ORPAN 2 is a solid middle ground. I know a number of places that have been using it in production for several years and had great joy of it. But inevitably, me being me, there has to be a part of this talk where I got annoyed with all of the existing code. So I wrote a thing called AppOpan, which is designed to be an overlay over CPAN. Now, what I mean by it being an overlay is that it doesn't keep any disks that are actually on CPAN on disk, because what it does instead is if you make a request to an OPAN server for a disk that isn't there, OPAN runs on HTTP. It's basically a tiny single file Mojo app, to the point where script/opan and lib/app/opan.pm are actually the same file. I just clone it at make disk time. And it proxies through to www.cpan.org, because that's GeoDNS, which is basically always fine. I should really add an environment variable to... No, there is an environment variable to specify, sorry. I don't remember. I don't remember. Look, I forgot the feature existed. This is the second time I've forgotten I implemented that feature. Somebody asked me if you could set a custom mirror. I went, I don't think so. I should really add that. Opened the code to see how hard it was. Realized I'd already added it. Forgot to check if I documented it. Then forgot I'd added it again and just reminded myself now. I've no idea. The entirety of OPAN is like 200 lines of Perl. Just read the source and then swear at me on IRC till I fix anything that's wrong with the docs. But this is because a mini CPAN or all of these other solutions need a full copy of all of the dists on disk per custom config. I want to be able to experiment with pinning different versions of modules very quickly. The time taken to sync down an entire copy of CPAN does not count as very quickly. And also it means that...
There is OPAN mirror is the environment variable, it's not documented.
So the environment variable is OPAN mirror, and I did forget to document it. FML. Anyway, but basically, I don't want to copy a gig of files to disk every time I want to try just pinning one different thing without affecting everybody else. So OPAN just does proxy upstream for anything except custom dists, but keeps its own indexes so you can commit the indexes into Git somewhere if you want to. Handles pinning, which you don't really need if you've got CPAN file.snapshot. Also handles custom dists. So basically, you can do OPAN init to create a directory tree, OPAN add your local darkpan tarball, and then OPAN pull will sync down O2 packages from the remote and merge all of yours into it. We do have the pen stuff. This is sometimes helpful. Usually, if you're trying to arrange for an initial carton install to always pull a specific version of a dist, that's handy. Other than that, I've not really found a use for it, except it was so easy to implement, I kind of had to do it anyway. So yeah, you don't generally need pinning if using Khan. And then you can do OPAN daemon, which we inherit for free from Mojo, and then run CPAN M pointed at that mirror. But obviously that's an extra step. Extra steps are annoying. So to make life easier, OPAN has a CPAN M subcommand that does the moral equivalent of firing up the server on a local port and then runs CPAN M pointing at it for you, and then once CPAN M is finished, it goes and kills the server. And as well, because obviously that it would be stupid not to, there's also OPAN carton. I was going to implement an OPAN Carmel, but there is currently no way in Carmel to set the mirror equivalent to Perl CPAN mirror. At least OPAN mirrors carton in not documenting the environment variable. Well done, me. Putting all this together, when Shadowcat gets a new commercial support customer, obviously one of the first things to do is to bootstrap an entire dev environment so I can poke through their code and try and reproduce the problem they have. Because obviously, if you've just onboarded a customer, the last thing you want to do is then wait a week for their systems team to have time to give you a development environment around putting all the fires out. You want a development environment now so you can start helping them to put the fires out so they actually have time to give you a proper environment. Chicken, egg, Satan, you know. Welcome to consultancy. So the trick is, if they have a local lib, I can just run carton against it, let it scutter the local lib and give me all of the dist versions, because that won't install anything if they're already the right version, but it writes the CPAN file.snapshot, at which point you can pretend that's what you did all along, which is great. If they have some sort of monstrous hybrid setup, which any company that's been in business for more than about 5 years probably has something that classes as a monstrous hybrid setup. I would complain, but it means that they've managed to build something that users like enough, that it's making enough money that they can afford to hire us. So let's not complain, right? So Tim Bunce ran into this problem a few too many times and wrote a thing called Dist Surveyor, which provides a script that will introspect your entire environment, write out the versions of everything. It checks meta CPAN, so it can detect if you have locally patched versions of things, which is really great, because sometimes people do and don't realize until they try and use a plain version. And then Dist Surveyor will give you a list of versions and can also write out a 02 packages file. Engineering from a 02 packages file to a mini CPAN or OPAN2 or OPAN setup is basically trivial, at least compared to the amount of work that went into making Dist Surveyor work in the first place. It's a very fine piece of kit, but yeah, 10 bunts. Anybody surprised? And then if you have internal dependencies, you just want to throw them into whatever solution you have. So again, I usually end up finding there's a load of Git checkouts and no particularly structured way of handling them. So cd in perl-build.pl, make dist, and then throw what it just built into an OPAN. I have honestly done this with a for loop in shell just to get started with something quickly. and then do opan pull, opan carton install, and you should now have an environment that has all of the exact versions of the relevant distributions, including the dark pan ones, all basically built in an isolated fashion, and you can now go on to using standard techniques to turn that into a better development environment and eventually roll it out to CI and then production. And honestly, I built opan to make this process quick. So in theory, if you have a system that's annoying the crap out of you currently, using the approach I just described should be the easiest way to get you to something that's sensible that you can then evolve. So far, it's proven to be the easiest way for me, at least. As ever, your mileage may vary, but yeah. So, yeah, choices in this one. Opan, if you have the specific ideas of opan. CPAN Mini for ancient, stupid, but completely reliable. Pinto for maximum overkill. Orpan 2 for pinned everything, which is very handy if you want pinned absolutely everything, so because you don't have carton yet, because then you can just point CPAN minus or CPAN or whatever at the Orpan 2. But yeah, hopefully I've given you a reasonable idea of how to pick which one is going to best fit your use case. And enjoy your shiny new deployment. Thank you very much. So, because this was a bunch of, here's a load of options and some vague waffling around them, I intentionally aimed to end a little bit short, so we had time for questions. Anybody want to ask anything? Okay, you first.
Have you considered using your CPAN depth putting on GitHub or something?
Have I considered what?
Putting your CPAN depths, Dist CPAN Dist, on GitHub.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Your patch files for CPAN. I put them on GitHub, so I just pulled. You said it's
For managing distro prefs. Yes, right, so, okay. Yeah, the idea of putting distro prefs onto something like GitHub so then you can just pull them down is fine, but the other problem I've had is then getting people to make sure that their CPAN config is actually pointed at wherever they put those, and now you're managing an extra repository. Whereas just say, and also now, because that's CPAN.pm specific, I'm cut off from things like carton. So it's usually easier for me to go, distro prefs were a really cool idea. Now I'm just going to apply the patches and throw them into an opan, because then I'll just commit the opan alongside the application, and that, for me, so far seems to be a simpler approach. But as I say, distro prefs is really cool, and the fact that things like the carton and CPAN minus ecosystem don't understand them is pretty much the only reason I don't use them more heavily. Anybody else? Yep.
Have you looked at app and be tiny? Have you looked at for dist building? Any thoughts on app module build tiny? For minimum underkill?
If memory serves, module build tiny wants the dependencies in the meta.json, doesn't it?
Oh, you can give it a CPAN file.
That'll convert it from a CPAN file. Okay, so yeah, module build tiny is also an option, but I was trying to be brief on the how do you get from a repository to a tarball part, because I was trying to focus on the what do you do with the tarballs once you've got them side of things. But yeah, module build tiny is also nice. I mean, I have yet another thing called Distar that lives off CPAN and auto bootstraps itself that I use for a bunch of my own dists. But I tend to think like module build tiny is something where if that's what you want, you will probably find it. Well worth a look though. Cool, let's all grab a coffee. If anybody thinks of any other questions, feel free to come track me down later and ask them. I may even answer. Thank you very much.